Hi, welcome everybody. Looks like we're right on time here. We're going to try to hit the ground running. Uh, Today's webinar is maximizing Modus 2.0's advanced features. This is a follow-up to a previous webinar that we did. This is part 3 in the training series that we do. My name is Riley Peart. I handle the trainings and client services side of things. With me today is Patrick Higaki. He does our sales and partnerships, and he's going to be the one presenting today since Ken is out. So it's going to be a wild ride. Uh, all right. I think I'm just going to turn the time over to him now. And let's see if we can get him spotlighted.
Great. Thanks, Riley. So as Riley mentioned, I will be presenting today, so may God have mercy on all your souls. And we'll try and keep things on track, not go on any crazy tangents. As always, please, if you have questions, feel free to ask them live in chat or in the Q&A section. We will definitely do our best to answer them in line, especially if they're relevant to the topic at hand. So today we're going to cover the advanced workflows of Modus 2.0. This is really designed to increase speed and efficiency, especially when doing non-conventional or non-rectangular rooms. And Riley, if you can handle the note bot, or yeah, all the bots joining the meeting, that would be wonderful. So for this project, we are going to go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go and share my screen region. So first things first, you're going to want to get into the launcher. And then to build a non-rectangular room, we are going to use the files and we're going to create a new project here. And I'm just going to call this advanced webinar. So give the project a name. And we're going to go ahead and go over here on the right side to the complex space editor. So this will take us into the floor plan editor. So the first thing we're going to want to do when we get into the floor plan editor is select a reference image. So I'll use this reference image, and at the top you can select the image. And you'll see hopefully my file modal is showing up here. So I'm actually going to want to go into a folder I already have created. And these floor plans are, I don't know if these floor plans are available on our, Riley, do you know if they're available on our forum? I know at one point we talked about possibly hosting these up.
I
Get
don't
into the right
believe they
place.
are.
Okay, well we can always bring those in. So here is the floor plan, and this is a simplified floor plan of a space that we've built in the past. The main thing that you want to know here is to have at least one known dimension. So in this particular space, we know the length of the room is 41 feet. So you can see here, and I'll adjust this transparency. Hopefully that's showing up well on Teams. And the width of the room is 28 feet. All we really need is one known length. So sometimes people will use the old door trick where you assume all doors are 36 inches or 3 feet. But in this case, we actually know the length of the room. So to calibrate the image, we simply take the little crosshair here and zoom in on an area and just click between two known points. So I'm just going to click from here to here and tell Modus that this is 41 feet. Now, if this plan were in meters or centimeters, you can certainly do any different type of unit of measurement as well. Let me just see what this message is. Make sure Riley's not messaging me about something important. You good, Riley? Okay. Trying to ignore other chats. So now that we have that scaled, we can then start drawing our walls. So we can jump out of the reference image here and start creating all of our different walls. Now there's a couple different ways to actually create these walls. By default, anytime you click on the screen, it will add a wall. And you'll notice we have a few different things happening here. So the first thing is that this is automatically incrementing in 6 inches, as well as snapping to 5-degree angle. So you'll see if I get real close to this wall here, that 60-degree angle is always incrementing in 5-degree increments. So we can change those settings up here in snapping. And the one that we want to change is, the main one is just change the length to 1-inch snapping. We'll go ahead and leave our angles at 5 degrees for the moment. Now, one thing I do personally when creating these is I actually turn off the add wall functionality here. It doesn't always turn on, but you can basically use the control key, and if you hold control, you'll notice that the little add wall icon pops up, and then you can just drag from each of these edges and just start building the room. Now we're going to go ahead and build in this little column area here, And one thing I'm also noticing is that our wall thickness is set to 6 inches. That's okay in this particular instance because this room won't have any attached spaces. But if you needed to change that thickness, that's right here in the wall thickness. So I'm just gonna keep drawing along here, and we're gonna get to this point in the room where we're no longer drawing 90-degree angles. Now this is important in this particular space, one, because we need some symmetry here, but two, if you watch what happens when I generate this wall, it's not gonna get exactly onto that exact angle that we need. So one thing we could do is we could change our snapping. But instead of doing that, we're going to just bypass this wall and continue drawing along the main area here. And then now that we have the 3 walls in place, we can grab this middle wall and just drag it in until it lines up with the floor plan. And so the angle that we were looking for is actually 151.63 degrees, which would have been pretty impossible to hit without using some trickery there. So using that mechanism where this basically allows us to drag this entire segment in will really expedite that process. And same thing up here, you'll notice that a lot of these angles aren't quite spot on. So I typically draw close to the floor plan and then drag the walls using these handles. And I think that's an important thing to call out here is how these handles actually work. So I'll use a new wall here to kind of explain it as we're going along. There's a few functions of the wall drawing tool that are worth noting. So one is that every wall segment, and I'll do this off the grid here, every wall segment has essentially 3 points on it. So there's a center, a left, and a right edge. And what you'll notice is as you click on that wall, those values will change. So if I grab, and let's just go ahead and make 2 walls to show how this works. So if I grab the wall by this point here, that is actually where I'm editing the wall, whether it's the length or the position. Now you'll also notice that each wall segment has these indicators on it to tell me the length of that position. And so what I can do is I can actually click on a specific part and say, oh, that actually needs to be 15 feet. And that will change based on whatever point in the wall we have selected. So if I select it in the middle and I change this to 12 feet, you'll see that it's going to edit based on that position of the wall. So going through this, you'll definitely, there's some tricks that you'll want to learn. And if you ever have questions on any of these things, you can certainly pop into our forums or email support. But getting these walls to snap right into place does take a little bit of finesse, but there are some certain tricks that you can use here to get them to be better. Same with the angles. So as you're working with a wall, you can actually tell it what you want these angles to be. Fortunately, most of this room is all 90-degree angles, but if you needed this to be 75 degrees, for instance, you can see you can just type in a value here, and it will automatically snap to that angle. Let's see here. So I'm gonna keep drawing along the walls here. Something is weird because this should be 90 degrees to that wall. What'd I do, Riley? Let's see. I'll just keep drawing and then we'll fix it in a moment, but there's something wonky with the floor plan here. Get this squared away. I'm trying to figure out why this wall is not 90 degrees from that wall. Let's go back a few steps here. I think I drew this wall not at, yeah, there we go. Okay, so get this wall parallel. There we go. Okay, we're back on track. Now, when we get to this column, we're going to go ahead and skip over it and not draw it in the floor plan. And this is something that's really important to note, is that there is a difference between the walls we draw in the floor plan editor and then blocks that we build in the actual live environment, the 3D environment. And so what we'll do is we'll skip over this column here and we'll discuss a few different ways to tackle features like this in the space. The really important thing to know though is that any wall we draw here in the floor plan editor will be fixed in the 3D environment. And that's actually a very, very important fact because in some cases we may have, let's say, a non-structural element that could be potentially moved. And so if we do have something like that, we definitely don't want that to be drawn in the floor plan editor. Let's say there's a column in the middle of the room that is still up for discussion. And so we can certainly look at how we can adjust those things in the non-floor plan editor side of Modus. So we got this room built out. There's still this weirdness here. But we can fix all this by just dragging. It looks like my floor plan is actually slightly crooked, which is kind of interesting. I guess maybe I didn't draw a perfectly straight line when I scaled things. And to note that you can actually adjust the rotation of the floor plan by 90 degrees, but if you need to do small adjustments, that's actually done by calibrating the image. So I'll just show how this works. And hopefully I can draw a straight line this time. If I hold the control key, it should draw a straight line. And when I draw that and say that's 41 feet, that will hopefully straighten things out. I'm not sure why that's not coming out quite right though. Whoops. We'll keep going though. The room is all square and that's what's important. We're close on these dimensions. Not 100% sure. Riley, do you have any ideas on why that's doing that for me? It must be this wall here that's causing that problem.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Oh, it's an
kinda
inch.
making
It's an
that-
inch longer than this wall. That's what it is. So if I make that 10 feet 6 inches, that should. There we go. That should square things up.
You should just shrink the other corner, right, to bring it up.
This corner? It's not gonna be square though. Well, at any rate, we will we'll continue venturing on because I don't want to get hung up on these little details. And I think that's an important thing to also talk through right now. We're not trying to build a perfectly finished room. When you're using this floor plan editor, you can definitely spend a lot of time getting every tiny detail exactly right. And as I mentioned, there are some gotchas here that I'm probably missing. But I just want to get this. There we go, 90 degrees. Hey, there we go. There it is. Okay, we are back on track. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And click save up here. There's a couple ways after this point you can go back into the launcher and load this, or up here in the design area you can just simply click open in Modus, and it'll process for a second, and then we'll be right into the live view of the room. All right, so once we're in the space, this should look familiar. So here is that column that we added in the floor plan editor, and then obviously on the opposite side, we have this open space where we're going to need to add things. So the next tool that we will use is the reference projector, and you can find that here in the product library going into objects, and then it is under custom and reference projection. You can also simply just type in projection or reference, and when we drag this in, you'll see there's this nice placeholder floor plan that we have. From here, I go over to the right side to my properties menu and I can select an image. And so this will use the same floor plan. Now, I'm going to really quickly pause and talk through how this tool works and how to optimize it for the best results. So let me just load up the floor plan that we already had. I'm not sure why this isn't sending me to the right folder by default. Here we go. Okay, so the floor plan that we used for the floor plan editor is this guy here. Now I'm going to pop into an software for editing images. One of the things that we recommend for doing this is actually cropping any of the extra data in the floor plan that you have to only line up with the walls of the space. So this is the actual original floor plan, and the area in red would be where we would recommend cropping. So you'll see we even crop right down to the wall extremities, to the inside edges of the wall. And so if we crop all that out, let's see. And then we're gonna image crop to selection, crop it out like so. Something like more along the lines of this will scale into the space a lot better. So I'll show you the difference here. So as I try and get this version to scale out from edge to edge, and I'm going to hide the ceiling here by pressing Control H just to get a nice good top-down view. But what you'll see is if I center this and start scaling it out, it's going to be hard to get it exactly aligned because there's all the extra data around the wall areas. So I'm going to select the other file, the cropped version of that same floor plan, and just show you how much easier this actually pops into space. So if I get this centered both along the length and the width of the room, I should at this point then just be able to pull this out until you see the image start to bleed up onto the wall. So as soon as you start to see that sort of highlighting happening, that's where you know you're in good shape there and the image is scaled out. So cropping is a really important technique to have in your pocket of tricks to get these images to scale very quickly. So going from here, this can also be used. So we're using this as sort of a hybrid plan. This has some ceiling details, but it also has all of our walls and our cabinetry. So you could certainly place a version of this like on the ceiling, for instance, and use it as an RCP. Why is that not dragging up there? Come on, there we go. If you wanted to, some people will even use it as a wall elevation diagram. So if you've got, wall paneling or displays, etc. We're just gonna leave it here on the floor for this particular demo. There are a few things to note on this. by default, we're going to take and strip out the alpha layer and we're assuming you're using either an all white or all black floor plan. We do have a few different things that you can do though. So the first is you can invert the imagery, so you can invert the color highlights. You can also change these colors. So we'll use a blue for this one, and adjust the brightness. But the other thing that you can do here is you can actually maintain the original alpha data and color information on the floor plan image. This is really useful if you have, like, let's say you've got an ease map of the place with color coding for heat maps, or maybe you're doing some other kind of color related indicators. You can maintain that alpha and use whatever you have. We won't dive too deep into the specifics there, but there's some really interesting use cases. So going on, we're going to just start adding things to the space. So in the floor plan, we've got these little coves that each have some cabinets. So we're just going to very quickly throw in cabinetry on either side here. And again, as you see this, and I'll raise this indicator here so that it gets up to the top of the cabinetry layer. And you see, as soon as I get these dragged out, we can very quickly start populating out the space with all of the elements. So there's a set of cabinets on either side of this. So we'll just drag that over. And there's our cabinetry. I'll pause for a minute. Riley, do you have any questions that we need to tackle yet?
No, we had someone drop out
Okay.
asking if you're sending out a recording, and we are.
Actually, that's a great point. It's a really good segue to something I forgot to mention. We have added in the help videos on the launcher here, we've actually included all of our webinar content. The most recent edition of every webinar should show at the top of the launcher help videos. So if you miss one of these, or you weren't registered, originally you had to register to get the recordings. Now you can just go into the help videos and you can play these up right from the launcher. So use that one. I think that was Micah that said he couldn't make it, or had to bail out. So look in the launcher. That should be live for everybody using a current version of Modus. All right, so we'll continue venturing on. And as we go around this room, this is where we have that column. So we'll tackle this column. I'm going to tackle this in a slightly different way than Ken does. He uses a primitive block. I really like the column block for doing these details that are like walls that are around the space. And the reason I like the column is that it automatically stretches from the floor to the ceiling. Now, depending on the space, this could cause you some problems, but the column is a really good asset for just very quickly throwing in something that needs to go floor to ceiling along the wall and not having to scale the height of it to the room. Now, one really important thing to note, and this is one of the differences, as I mentioned over here, this block is technically a column. It's actually three wall blocks. If we go and look at it from the exterior, here's a wall, and here's a wall. The thing to note about this, and this has pros and cons, is that each surface can have a different face material. Whereas if I select the column over here, it's kind of an all or nothing. So if these were like wood paneled, I can select that material and the column will automatically populate all three sides with that material. Whereas if I needed it to be on this side, I'm going to have to actually select all three faces of that wall to get that to be the same material. But that's a really important thing to note. And again, there are pros and cons to each approach. The nice thing about this is if this is not necessarily a structural element and there's discussion around how wide this column should be, or potentially removing it entirely, adding it in the environment allows you that flexibility. All right, so I think we are in a good spot here to just, any questions yet, Riley? Are we all good there?
We are all good.
Okay, great. So the next thing that we want to do, and the next topics that we want to tackle, are how are we going to go in here and actually, let me get this cabinetry in and get the little details finished up here real quick. Whoops. Just drag over. Copy of this guy to that side. Get it lined up there. Copy of this one. Drag it over to the other side. Okay, so we have the room now. As far as the major details, the shell of the room is built and the cabinetry and columns are all placed. So the next thing we're going to tackle is actually going to be a custom element for furniture. So this is a good workflow for typically for doing things like furniture, maybe some detail work like architectural details. There are certain things that we can't natively do in Modus, like arches or curved details. So using a custom object, and again, we'll go back to the custom section here and bring in external 3D model. And I'm going to go ahead and hide the floor plan. And here's a quick tip on this. You can use either the outliner to hide the floor plan projection, or just simply press Control and H and hide that. If you don't do that and you go into your rendering mode, that will always show up. So you definitely want to hide that before you start taking any of your renders. So clicking the projection and either clicking hide, or there's actually an option to show the object right here as well. I'm also going to lock its position so I don't accidentally move it as we're going through any of this. But we'll go ahead and hide that object and then come back to our custom 3D element here. So when you first bring this into the world, the thing you'll see is this little missing 3D model text, and you can simply pull up and select a file. Now I'm going to go back to that same folder, and I've got a version of this table that we're using that has some issues with it. Now, we're not going to go into solving any of these issues today. We have a separate training. You can check it out in the launcher, and we do this one live every couple of months about how to get your UV mappings or the textures to look perfect. So when you look at this table, you'll notice everything looks a little blurry. If you use, there are certain elements that you can use that can actually really help. Like if I like the brick one, that's sort of my reference. If I select the brick and it doesn't look like bricks, like for instance, if I go here, if it doesn't look like that, this is definitely a UV mapping issue. And again, solving that issue is a lot more loaded than we have time to attack today. But there are a lot of great tutorials, and we even have our own that you can join up for a webinar if you want to see how to get the best UV mappings. So I'm going to go ahead and load up the version of this that is the not bad UVs, and you'll see the difference immediately there. So the bricks actually look properly scaled. We've even gone to the effort of moving and rotating the textures around this table, so that when I use a wood finish, for instance, and we'll use a different wood here, we'll use this Biltmore cherry. You'll see that the grains even line up really nicely. Now, a couple of things to note on your external 3D mesh. Depending on the source, you can get very mixed results. As I mentioned, this is a table that we authored. I think we authored this in like 3ds Max or Blender. Doesn't really matter the authoring software. What does matter, though, is that if you're getting these from the internet and you're not spending any time with UV wrapping and optimizing, you're very likely going to get some mixed results. So the internet has lots of great assets, but oftentimes the UV mapping won't be right. So you may have to do something. Again, we'd encourage you to watch the video that Riley just posted. Also, just if if you're doing a lot of custom assets, just spend the time to learn the software, whether it be Blender or 3ds Max. I got to let Riley back into the call here. Welcome back, Riley. Now, a few things to note here in the properties panel for this external model. We have some options here for mount side, and I'll just click these and you can kind of see what happens. When I click top, it's basically taking the entire table and sticking it to a different surface. And these are meant for basically if the table or the object that you are importing is not oriented properly, you can use these to sort of flip the direction of them. So depending on how the authoring software has them, their bottom face. In this particular case, because we knew it was a table and it needed to be oriented this way, we have the bottom being the mount side, but you can adjust these. The other one is modeled units. So if for some reason you go in here and the table is massive, like so, that looks more like a freeway overpass, or if it is itty bitty tiny, like so, furniture for ants, these options allow you to reset the units being used when we import that mesh. We also have a freeform option. This will scale the entire thing uniformly, but let's say maybe you're off by a few inches or something like that. You could use this mechanism, but really knowing the units that the mesh was built in is ideal. Typically these come in centimeters, but sometimes they'll be different. Auto will basically try and translate whatever the file data tells us. Additionally, we have rotation, and so this does allow you to rotate the entire mesh in 90-degree increments along each of the 3 axes. Move to world center is an important one. If for some reason this thing gets way the heck out there, you can just click this and it will bring it right back to the 0 position in the room. And then finally, we have our materials. And this particular table has 3 different materials. We've even gone through the effort to name them. So we have tabletop, the inside, and the legs. And so we'll just do a black leg there, and we'll make this some kind of a leather. Cool. All right, so now we've got the table installed, and everything's looking pretty good there. Any questions on the 3D mesh side of things, the custom elements? And Riley, are you with me? Hello, Riley. Oh, Riley is, let's see here. I think Riley is no longer a presenter. Let me make him, interesting. Make a presenter. There we go. Riley, check, check. 1, 2, Riley. Hey, welcome back. All right. No questions, it sounds like. Yeah, Riley got demoted. We're going to promote Kevin to be co-host next. But yeah, I don't think there's any questions, so we're going to keep plugging away here. Let's go in. Oh, there is one more really important feature of the custom mesh, and that is this attachable element or attachable option here. I'll just bring in a laptop and show how that works. If I can spell. If the attachable option is disabled, what you'll see is basically the laptop will not be allowed to go sit on that surface. So this is really important if you are trying to place things on that object. If it's a table, seems pretty important that things get attached. Oftentimes we do not turn on the attachable function for things like chairs. And that just has to do with the workflow and like them not getting in the way of doing other things. But attachable is one really important one to note. So I'm going to throw a few chairs in here just to kind of fill out the space. And then we'll move into custom images. And that's the next kind of major part of this. Just throw a few chairs in here around the table. Ken doesn't do this, but I feel like it really helps sell the illusion that this is a space we're trying to finish out. All right, so custom images is the next topic that we want to cover. And so with custom images, there's a handful of different things that we can use custom images for. Group these together with the table. There we go. All right. So now we've got the table and chairs all grouped, and we can start working on some branding in the room. So typically custom images are reserved for whether it's a custom piece of artwork that maybe your client has, doing a corporate logo or branding. We did a boardroom once for like a hospital system, and it was like a bunch of pictures of the founders, so a bunch of old dead guys on the wall. There's a lot of ways you can use this. And again, you can find this by either typing in the word custom or going into the library and looking in the custom category. But we call it the external image. I'll just throw it up here on the front wall. And again, we'll use the properties panel to select an image. And then we'll go in here and we'll use this logo. So there's a few things to note with custom images. This is great for artwork, signage, custom logos. We don't really recommend doing it for like custom coverings of walls like wallpaper or maybe even custom flooring. It doesn't necessarily tile well, so it's not a great solution for something like that, but it's perfect for what we're doing here, just some branding. So again, in the properties panel, we have a few different options. One of probably the most important ones is this lock aspect ratio. And so what this allows me to do, I've unlocked it, is if I change the height or the width of it, you'll notice that it is not maintaining the original aspect ratio of that file. And so it's just always going to try and fill based on the width or the height of it. If it's branded like this, we almost always want to maintain that aspect ratio. There's usually guidelines around margins and things like that. But if it's just like maybe we're filling, a wall with some kind of a color or a gradient, and you don't want necessarily to maintain or don't need to maintain the aspect ratio, you can click this option. Mount side, very similarly to the mounting side for the 3D object or 3D mesh. This basically allows us to override the default positioning. So if I click bottom, it is going to take the bottom edge of that image and mount to that side. So this is great if you're using it as some kind of a floor standing object. Same idea with top. It would be if you have a hanging type of image for signage or something like that. And then back is exactly like it sounds. It's going to take the back surface. Now, when it's in auto mode, it will always assume that when you mount it to the wall, you want it on the back. When you mount it to the ground, you want it on the bottom. And when you mount it to the ceiling, you want it on the top. So those are just overrides for those automatic. We also have some framing options that you can use. So if this is again, go back to that example of the dead guys all over the walls, you can go in and use both the framing and the matte options here. Lastly, we have two additional features. We have a backlight, and this is pretty cool because it actually emits light into the space. So if we dim down all the lights, you'll see that it's still emissive. It's always going to show. Some of our customers and some of our users will actually use this for simulating specific types of screens. There's a number of use cases, but it also does glow, so it will emit light when we're in the higher quality lighting modes, and we'll tackle that in a moment. And lastly, acoustically absorptive. This essentially is just, will it react as an absorption or reflective surface using this reverberation burst. And so if I have it set to absorbent right now, when I trigger this burst, you'll see that the particles, the ones that hit it, will not bounce off of it. And so if you're using it as like an acoustic piece of artwork, you can use that functionality to absorb those particles in the reverberation burst. All right, so next couple of things we've got, there are some additional settings that we can do, or not settings, but additional options that we can use for the type of file we're using in these custom images. So you'll notice that if I go back to selecting the file, and I'll make a copy of this here, we have a few different versions of this. So this is actually using, and so the first is a JPEG, which does not have any transparency data. The second version is a PNG file, and it does have transparency. And so you'll notice these additional options have popped up in the PNG version. So we have a couple options that you can select. You can either say no transparency, masked, or alpha. And using these different options will actually change the performance, but it'll also change how the object looks in this space. So depending on what you're doing, you can certainly find some interesting use cases for taking some of those transparency layers. And like, for instance, Ken's got this fancy one with a lens flare. You'll see that as you adjust these options, the way the image and the transparency layers look in the space will change. And so if you wanted to have this flaming lens flare, completely Photoshop artistic mode, using the alpha layer versus masked, you'll see how that kind of comes out. Is it definitely a better, visually and performantly, it will also come out a little bit better. All right, so I want to pause for questions, and then we can dive into some of the additional sort of nitty-gritty features that we consider advanced, and also show a preview of a new upcoming feature. So any questions, Riley, or anything that you think I should touch on that I've glossed over?
We just got one. When trying to replicate framed artwork in a space, sometimes I don't get a perfect photo to crop. Any recommendation on things, to fix things like that?
I'd be interested to know, is from Jim, what you're running into. It's nice and squared. I mean, so typically, if you're bringing a photo into Modus and you maintain aspect ratio, it should respect that aspect ratio. If it's, and again, Jim, knowing a little more about what types of photos you're trying to crop in would be helpful. Again, if it's the example of founders, old dead guys on the wall, oftentimes those are 9:16 portrait mode. And so just making sure that you're using those aspect ratios. I use a piece of software called GIMP. This is a free open source editing software, and it's really good for doing aspect ratio stuff. It even has like a fixed aspect ratio option that you can put in here, and you could say I want everything to be 9:16, and it would always crop to that aspect ratio. Again, your mileage is going to vary. Some people are Photoshop. Okay, if I take the photo, you're talking about a real photo of a space. Okay, we don't do anything for perspective adjustment. I will say, Jim, that GIMP has some perspective adjustments that you can use. So this is going to look really weird, but I'm basically going to undo and show you how you can do some perspective shifting. And this, I think your use case is probably a little unique. My assumption is you're using a photo out a window and you're trying to get a perspective looking out the window and like the exterior of the building. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But yeah, that's honestly where 2D environments and 3D environments don't mix super well. I don't know if I have an example of this, but let me see if I do. Here, we'll copy this custom image. Actually, let me just find a skyline real quickly. We'll go to Google, the old Google hack here. You're in Houston, right? So I'm just going to grab an image of a Houston skyline. Copy this image. So I'm assuming what you're trying to do is something along the lines of this. You've got this image. You want this to be your background. I'll just put it on the desktop, and I want to export this.
Yeah. Well, who's talking about framed artwork, it looks like. So maybe it
Okay.
was a
Yeah, I'm not
portrait just
sure.
not taken straight on. So
Yeah,
it would
that would
need
be
more
yeah,
of
that would
a
be more of a
GIMP or
photography
Photoshop
issue.
question than a Modus one.
Yeah, definitely more of an image editing. Same idea though. If you're taking a picture of a picture and you're skewed, I'm making hand motions. I don't know if that's actually showing on screen here.
It's not.
It's not. Of course, it's not. If you are slightly skewed, you're definitely going to want to, edit that. And GIMP does have what we call perspective shifting. They even do it in 3 dimensions. So there's a lot of ways to correct that. We don't have a Photoshop or GIMP tutorial, but maybe that's something worth looking at doing just for, basic usage.
We did have one more question.
Sure.
Bethany Courier was asking, for a 2x2 drop ceiling, is it possible to have one side aligned with the ceiling grid?
Great question, Bethany. Not on a ceiling block. And so the reason for that, and I think I just changed my screen over, so hopefully you're
Yes.
seeing me now. And I can make hand
Yes, we
motions.
see you.
Awesome, awesome. I'm really good at hand motions. Um, yeah. Well, so Jim, there is actually not there's a way to get it to hack it together. So if I select this ceiling and I make this a grid, you'll see that everything is aligned to the center of the world here. So this line right here is the dead center of the space. Now, if I add a new ceiling block and I give it the same material, it is going to line up with that exact same grid, and there's no changing that because this uses a global UV mapping. So as I move this around, that tiling always stays exactly where it's at. And there are some variances here, but ceiling grids are the example that really put a spotlight on this. Now, that said, if I use a primitive block, I can actually change both the orientation and the location of this gridding. So this does not use a global mapping. Ceiling grid. So as I move this grid, it will maintain the mapping based on 0, the origin point of this primitive block. So if you're trying to get something real close to the edge over here, Bethany, like you're mentioning, maybe this ceiling grid is actually not a grid. This is drywall, and these sides are gridded. Yes, this is the way to do it. I hope that this is answering the question, and Jim, maybe you're learning something today, because this is the way that I would recommend aligning the grid off of the center or the global alignment. Great question, though. I love that one because it's something that we had a much less good answer for a few months back. We didn't have these primitives that would allow you to do something like this. Any other questions that we want to answer before we dive into some of these additional ideas or future features?
I don't think so. I think we're cleared up right now.
Okay, awesome. So let's talk through a couple of the kind of bonus features, if you will. One that I want to show, and I'm just going to throw some displays on the wall here. Maybe this is we'll put the branding off to the side here, and we'll put in a nice, this is a very small display for this room. But there's actually a couple cool things that we're adding in our next release. So I'm on a preview build. This is actually a different preview build than we showed at Infocom. So one is we have something called persistent label sizes. This was requested by a few different customers. So we will now allow you to always show the diagonal size of all screens in a space. Even in photo mode, and even if that design assistant or you don't have that display selected. So that's persistent screen size labels. The other cool one here is I can actually now interact with the screen size. And so if I knew I wanted this to be 120 inch, I can just simply punch in a value there, and you'll get that new screen size. And we'll make these smaller too, because this is going to take up too much space here. So that's a couple of nice ones that we have. The other that we have that is really cool, and we showed this at Infocom, is we actually have a discus helper coming out in our next release as well. So what this allows me to do, I'll go down to a single display, and we'll actually pull the lid off this room, and we'll turn the background black. So those who are at Infocom already saw this. Persistent labels will be awesome. Yes, they are really nice, and it was a requested feature. So again, we're still listening, even though we're not in beta. We still want to hear feedback and input because it allows us to continue driving the roadmap. This discus helper was really well received at Infocom. It's a wonderful helper if you're using discus, even if you're not using the standard to design around, but just to inform your client. So I'm going to go all the way up here, and actually another kind of fun one. We've changed the way that movement works a bit so that if you are looking straight down, I can now use, instead of using the W and S keys to move up and down, I'm actually using space and shift. So this allows me to much more natively do these top-down views. But what you're seeing here is essentially